Hey everyone, you're watching KTAL News Now. I'm your host Anthony Mocklin, and today is August 29th, 2025, which marks 20 years since Hurricane Katrina completely devastated the greater New Orleans region. And here with us to talk about it today is Marlo Lacen, who is the digital content manager here at KTAL, to talk about her experience during it and just growing up in New Orleans. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Anthony, for having me.
So, it's my understanding that you grew up in New Orleans most of your life
hmm
and just had a lot of history there with your family members. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so both my parents were born and raised in New Orleans. I was born in New Orleans, as was my older brother. And my dad was in the military, so we moved around a lot. But when he finally retired from the military in 1990, we moved back home to New Orleans permanently. So I went there all through high school and all through my adulthood until I moved here 5 years ago.
And what was your experience like, especially, at that time in 2005? There was a lot of confusion, there was a lot of last minute kind of
Yes,
evacuation orders.
yes.
So what was your experience like during that time?
Like most people, I think that there was a storm. I can't remember if it was Cindy or Dennis, but a lot of people had evacuated then, and it was like a month. Like, so maybe like late June or early July was that other hurricane. And people were just like, nah, I'm not going to leave. And I remember the Saturday before, we left on a Sunday, but the Saturday before that, my ex husband at the time, and his friends all went out. It was just like, a great meeting of all of them. Everybody was available, and I was home and I just cleaned. I cleaned. I don't know if you're familiar with the term nesting. Normally, before women have babies, is something, I don't know if it's chemical, biological, but they'll like clean the whole house. And so I did something similar ahead of Katrina, like wash, mop, clean, swept everything. And it was mostly because I felt like, oh, if we evacuate for these 3 days, because that's what we were all thinking. If we evacuate for these 3 days, I don't want to come home and have to do like housework. So I cleaned my house that Sunday. I left with my mom, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and my kids and a couple dogs. And we drove to Baton Rouge. We left about noon, and everybody knows the ones in Baton Rouge are like an hour apart, hour and 20 minutes. If you hit like traffic or a wreck, it was like 10-hour drive. It was like it was a parking lot on I-10 going millimeters per hour, like just barely moving. And it was really intense and it was scary because there was no traffic going in the city and all the traffic was going out of the city. And it was the most traffic that I'd ever seen. The only thing I could compare to it is when the Saints won the Super Bowl. Everybody was coming back for the Super Bowl parade. But yeah, it was pretty frightening and uncertain time, I think.
And what did y'all have, like a set place to stay already? Did you have family in Baton Rouge, or you were just kind of just trying
Yeah,
to get away?
so my in-laws have family in Baton Rouge, and we were actually fortunate because the uncle, they had a sizable home. His son and his wife had a sizable home, and then he also has some ancillary properties. So once we realized that the 3 days was going to be an undetermined number of days, we kind of, as a group, did what we could to get those properties kind of livable, just so that everybody can have space. Because again, now that we know the water is 20 feet high, the roads are done, right? Some highways washed completely away. Uh, we knew we'd be there for a while. So it was just a really grateful experience to be able to have family that was able to take us in, and help us, just navigate, because some people were plopped in places they never even heard of before. So it was, I'm grateful for that fact that we had somewhere to go. So it was able to provide a little bit of stability for our kids.
And with the evacuation and just people just trying to get away, so many people were displaced from where they had lived for years and years and years. Do you have any family members or friends who, I guess, haven't been back since?
Absolutely. For the first 30 days after Katrina, I didn't know where my dad was. Like, I had no idea. And I had a chance meeting a family member in the mall in Baton Rouge. It's the Cortana Mall. I don't even think it's still open now, but we ran, just crossed each other's paths. And I was like, have you talked to my dad? And she gave me his number. He had gotten a new number. And that gave me a sense of relief. But I definitely know people who never came back, people who lost property, lost family homes. A lot of people found better lives, right? They left and they went places. They found better schools. They found different environments that attracted them that they didn't, again, know existed. So it worked out, I think, how it needed to work out for certain people. But some people encountered like devastating loss, right? Some people lost multiple family members. Some people lost their mental health because it was so stressful and it was just so much unknown. I think that that's the first time that I just didn't have an answer, like just going with the breeze, like because you had no way of knowing what was next.
And did you have, you said you were in the process of nesting and everything. Did you have children at that time or not yet?
I did. I had a son and a daughter. So my two, they're now adults, but they were, oh, I don't know, maybe like 9 and 4 at the time, or uh, 10 and 4. I don't know. They're 6 years apart. So however that works out, 10 and 4 at the time. So they were really young, didn't understand what was going on. So it was really, again, I was grateful that we had family so that it was as close to normal. Their cousins were there, their aunts and uncles were there. You know, we were with family, people that they were familiar with. So even though they had to go to a new school for a little while, it wasn't like devastating. Like some people really went through it, and it was really a hard time for a lot of people. So yeah, Katrina is something else. It's weird because it's this weird blot on a timeline, right? It's like before Katrina, after Katrina, like people other places kind of forget that it even happened. They don't have that muscle memory the way New Orleanians and people in South Louisiana and South Mississippi have, where you know we remember a life before August 29th, 2005, and we remember what life was like August 30th, 2005, right? Totally different. It changed the landscape of the city for some ways in good, some ways not so good. But I mean, that's what happens with change. You get an overhaul. You're gonna get things are gonna be drastically different.
Yeah, the experience that you were talking about with your children, it sounded very similar to mine because I'm pretty sure I was like 7 years old whenever it happened, and my grandparents on my mom's side at the time were living in Jacksonville, Florida, so that's
Okay.
where our entire mom's side of the family ended up like
Yeah.
relocating for the time being. Like we were in their public schooling, like everything was like normal to us,
Yeah.
but whenever we came back, like all the walls in our house were gone
Yeah.
because of the water damage. So that sounded very. At that time, I didn't really know. I didn't really like grasp
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly just how much of an impact it had. Because like I said, I was like 7.
Which is the great thing about kids, because I think my kids are kind of the same way. Like they remember us being on this extended vacation, they remember us living away, but I don't think that they ever really remember the devastation, the way that we, the adults, kind of. So that's really good that y'all were able to adjust as well, because I know that that's probably what I was the most concerned about, was like, how are my kids gonna be after this?
Yeah, and then what you said earlier with just trying to like, I guess accommodate for all the family members at one house. Like we had
Oh yeah,
everybody
air
there.
mattresses. I never knew air mattresses was such a thing. You know what? Also, Katrina gave us was text messaging. Before Katrina, there was no text messaging, but I remember, like, I knew that my then husband and his family were on the way because they had stayed behind. He had an aunt and a cousin. They didn't want to leave, and he was like, "Well, if it gets as bad as they say, I'm gonna stay because they can't swim." And so he was gonna make sure that they were good, right? And so I remember we lost contact, and I was like, "What's this SMS?" Like on my phone, like a flip phone, like a razor phone or something. And I was like, "What's this SMS?" And then I like sent my first text message during Katrina and he was like, "I didn't know what that thing was. It was just like words on my screen." I thought it was a message from like random message. So good things came out of it, bad things came out of it. A lot of life lessons. I definitely learned patience during Katrina. I learned that even though we have like these socioeconomic barriers, like what neighborhood you live in, how much money you make, what do you do for a living, when I was in those Red Cross lines, Salvation Army lines, whatever lines were going on, everybody was in those lines. I met doctors. I met people who lived in fancy homes way uptown. Um, Everybody was in disarray. Everybody took 3 days worth of clothes. Everybody had to rebuild their lives. And it's this shared experience that unless you've had it, it's so foreign to you. But it's a wild time. I didn't think I'd get like emotions or like have feelings because I didn't. I always kind of separate myself because I did evacuate and I didn't experience all of the bad stuff and the trauma that a lot of people experience while waiting. But it's still traumatic to just go back there and think about it. Think about what my home looked like when we got back. That big old ring of dirt at the top of the wall. Uh, there was this weird sludge that was like inches thick that was on the floor, and it was like mud and I don't know, oil. The smell, there was this, I call it the refrigerator smell. That's the best way to describe it. It's like if you think of hundreds of thousands of rotten refrigerators and what kind of a scent that would permeate into the air. I will never forget what it smelled like. I never want to smell it again. But it was everywhere, and it would, if you went and cleaned a home, it would get into your clothes, it would get into your hair. Like you would really have to do a deep, intensive self cleansing if you went into a home to like start the process of recovery. But that smell was in the air. I remember everything closing early. Once we got back, I think we went back to New Orleans like mid-November. And I just remember everything closing early. Traffic lights weren't working. Certain areas of the city were like bustling, and certain areas were dead. Like the grass was dead, the houses weren't there. So it was. I hope never to experience anything like that again, ever.
And you were talking about the emotions, and even though like the for example the recent documentaries that have come out like on Hulu and like everything, like it's been bringing it back into the spotlight and stuff. But even people who are from New Orleans and went through that, like they said, like they can't even get through it like without, like they just did not want to revisit that time in their life just because of how traumatic it was for them.
But Ryan Coogler's documentary is so well done. I haven't watched the other ones. I probably won't because it just is like, it almost feels like disaster porn at some point. It's weird, like how the story ends, so like why am I watching it, right? But Ryan Coogler's documentary was really well done and just like telling the story, but it was so many failures, and I wish that obviously Katrina is the example that government cannot solve your problems, right? But I wish that local governments and state governments would do a better job of preparing, right? Because so much lack of preparedness at the local and the state level in all the parishes, not just one or two, like all the parishes. The state was not ready. The city governments, the parish governments, none of them were ready for it. And I just wish that voters and residents would get a little bit more serious about that kind of disaster mitigation, right? We could fight about all the little stuff, but when it comes to saving people's lives and preserving, cultures and, just preserving families, I think it's really important for that planning to happen. So hopefully with all these documentaries, people will be watching and they'll get a glimpse of like, we need to button down and like plan, right? Because it could be a tornado, it could be an earthquake. We saw California devastated by wildfires. So get it together, people.
And you're from New Orleans, so obviously that, it seems as if the city can't even just fix like a pothole in the street. So why are we expecting them to respond in just like
on a grand scale like that, right? On such a grand scale. And it just, it just isn't. So people have to. I had the privilege of interviewing General Honore, who is a key character in Hurricane Katrina. He is the person that really brought order to the situation. He's the person that reminded law enforcement that they were dealing with people, right? These are your cousins, your neighbors, your school friends. Um, I had the pleasure of talking to him, and he said something that has sat with me since that interview, and it was, you have to be your own disaster preparedness planner, right? You have to plan for your own disaster. And I was like, wow, everybody needs to hear that. Everybody needs to know that you need to be ready. You need to have a few dollars somewhere. You need to have a game plan. You need to talk to relatives. If I gotta run, can I come to you? If I gotta run, can I come? Like, where can you go if you need to? I think it's really important, especially when we look at the state of affairs. I mean, it's still the infrastructure down there is still in disarray, right? Katrina exacerbated problems that already existed, and they can't fix it because a lot of the infrastructure is really old, and nobody wants to hear, oh, we gotta tear the whole thing down and start over. So I don't know, but it wasn't fun. That's for sure. It was. It was not a fun time. But I will say, I think that another lesson I learned, and that your parents could probably agree with, is the most important thing are the people in your lives. Like, I had just painted my house. We had just furnished it, maybe within 6 months. Katrina did not care. It came through, it wet everything, it left a nasty ash on everything, it left a dirty ring around the house. It did not care, but the people that I love remained intact. I didn't lose anybody in that storm. Everybody was able to keep their mind, and part of that is because we were all together. And I think that is the thing that I learned, is to value people, value relationships, value your family, because that's what you're going to have to lean on in a disaster. And the stronger that is, the stronger those bonds are, the easier it'll be to get through those really tough times.
And I know you just talked about having your family members there to be there for you and support you, and you had, your family in Baton Rouge, but is there anybody in particular that you were able to lean on no matter what, that was just your rock, like, throughout the whole thing?
Um, I think everybody. I think everybody. I think, during that time, I wasn't a great cook before, but during that time, I learned how to really cook really well. And that's a tribute to my ex husband's mom. Me and her would get in the kitchen every day, and she would just teach me. And I was willing to learn because there wasn't much else going on. Um, I really just leaned on all of the family, like every single person, um, to get that sense of normalcy and that sense of, we're going to be all right because we're all in it together. And everybody was very collaborative and willing to do whatever we needed to do to move into the houses. And as people's houses got back online, back in New Orleans, coming back slowly, everybody supporting each other with, oh, FEMA trailer, can I put it on your property, or what, just whatever was going on. Everybody was in it together, so it made it much, much easier.
Yeah, and I remember my dad, he normally stays at home, like, throughout the storm, just to make sure,
Yeah, yeah.
everything is fine and whatever, but he even he was like, "All right, I got to get out of here, like, now." Like,
Yeah.
what was the experience like whenever you realized, like, "Oh my gosh, like, this is something that's, like, really, really serious."
I think it was early Sunday morning. And normally with these storms, if you live in South Louisiana, you know how to read a storm, right? They get to a certain point, they start to wobble, they start to fall apart. This storm was getting more and more defined. Every time you see that graphic image, that eye wall was tighter. It just was a big old massive blip on the map, and it really frightened me because we would watch, right, whenever there's a storm coming. It's part of the deal, right? You get your barbecue pit, you get all your meat, you get all your stuff, whose house we going to, and we're going to monitor this storm, and we're going to cook our food and enjoy ourselves until it's time for everybody else to go home. And this just didn't feel like that. Katrina felt very different. It felt ominous. um, it didn't normally they hit Caribbean islands, and they kind of slow down once they hit the land. And that thing was just barreling through water like a destructo machine. It was really, really rough. And so I think that Sunday morning I woke up, I was like, started making phone calls like, we got to get out of here. And that's when we decided that he would stay behind and help his other family members and make sure that we got off safely. But that 10-hour trip, like, I think that that was the thing, like that long commute, all you had time was to think about how different it was going to be, because this wasn't like anything else that you'd experienced. And you knew it. You just knew it.
And one of the big things that gets talked about, like in the aftermath, is the safe haven that was the Superdome. But I didn't. I know you said all of your family was able to get out, but I didn't know if you knew anybody personally that was there during that.
It's funny because yesterday, my fiance and I was telling him that I'm doing this with you today. And he was just kind of teasing me, like, I want to tell my Katrina story. So I recorded him, and he actually was in New Orleans East, and he ended up going to the convention center. And he talked about, you know, something I think we didn't think about in the minute. And when media gets a narrative, sometimes, they're not pulling out all the nuances. But if you think about everybody that was evacuated, you had every kind of person that was in there, right? You had some people were not well mentally. You had some criminal element in there. You had a lot of disabled people. You just every kind of person that was represented in the city of New Orleans was represented there, but without the mechanisms that keep people safe. So they were just held, just pinned in there in the dark, no power, right? And this, I had a friend who describes her story, and she would say that she lived in New Orleans East as well, and their house was kind of off the ground, and she woke up soaking wet, and she was like, "What is going on?" And starts fussing at her brother like, "You left the something water running," and realized when she looked outside that they had to get out because of how much water she saw through the back door. And so it's just stories like that. Like, my fiance was telling me that they were pushing bodies, right? So they were pushing dead bodies away um, to keep them from like floating with people. But if you could imagine being in a boat or maybe floating on an air mattress or whatever you're using as a flotation device, and there's cars underneath you, right? So that water is gross. The water is toxic. Um, People, he describes seeing people hanging in trees, right, where the water was so high at one point, because he was saying that they were using uh, fence, like 6 foot planks for fences as paddles. So imagine you're in a boat on the street using a fence post to paddle a boat. That's how much water it was. And it's just, you cannot comprehend even what that is like. You know, in the documentary they described, the guy described his brother running into a stop sign and busting his leg open because he didn't see it, a stop sign. So it's kind of like, that is really scary, like that fear of the unknown. It did develop an irrational fear in me. Maybe it's not too irrational, but I became very leery of alligators in the water whenever it would flood in New Orleans after Katrina, because I just felt like it was a thing. Like nobody could convince me that it wasn't a thing. And when it would flood in certain areas, you get easily 3 feet of water in a rainstorm on a regular day without it being a storm or a hurricane or anything. So that that kind of stuff is really that fear of the unknown. Everybody talks about the darkness, how frightening it was to just be in the dark, like that amount of like nothing. There's no street lights because the streets are flooded. There's no car lights because cars can't pass on the flooded streets. So it's just waiting on the sun. And that seems really frightening. That seems really frightening.
And I know you said you've you lived there up until like 2020, and but did you notice anything like during your time afterwards that I guess like the effects that are still being felt today, like personally?
Yeah, I mean, it's just changed. You know, it's like I said, some things are changed for the better. Some things have just kind of, I don't know if watered down is the appropriate thing, but maybe like just kind of change the culture, like alter the culture. I think people don't realize you don't love New Orleans for the food, you don't love New Orleans for the party, you love New Orleans for the people. That is what makes it unique, right? The people, the stories they tell, the way we speak, the way we party, the way we love and welcome people in, that's what makes it unique. And I think that once you have this disbursement, a lot of other places get lucky because they get that spirit and they get that culture and they're able to share it. But it did make the city kind of suffer to me because it just doesn't feel the same 20 years later, because so much of it has dispersed. And so many people, you know, after Katrina, the price of everything went up. Home prices went through the roof, rent prices went through the roof. So a lot of people who lived there before, even though they may have wanted to come back, they couldn't. And so it really just kind of put a damper on what it feels to be in New Orleans because it's the people that give it the vibrancy. It's the people that give the food flavor. It's the people that give the music flavor. So without the people, everything is kind of, it's all right.
And I guess what aside from Katrina, do you have any like memorable times or your some of your favorite moments about like living in the city that could still apply today?
I think my favorite thing about New Orleans is Mardi Gras. You know, Mardi Gras is everybody's family reunion. All your cousins come in town, all your friends come in town. Everybody has got that house or those couple of houses that they gather at, depending on the parade route. And I think it's just a time, regardless of what y'all see on TV about, girls gone wild in Bourbon Street, it is family reunion time in New Orleans. The 2 weeks of Mardi Gras is about family, and I think that that's what I miss most is a lot of times because I don't have FOMO, so I don't mind staying home, but I miss having the option to just be in the mix because Shreveport Mardi Gras doesn't feel like New Orleans Mardi Gras. Lafayette, none of them feel the same again because it's the people. It's not about the parade route. It's not about what people are throwing off the floats. It's about the vibe that you get from the people and the energy that all the people feel because it is a time to come together for families. So I think that Katrina made me really appreciate Mardi Gras more than I did. I kind of took it for granted what it was. But I think Katrina definitely made me appreciate Mardi Gras more. We got a Saints victory out of it. We got a Super Bowl. We were blessed with a Super Bowl victory after, which was a good time for the city. And it was a good time for the morale of the people because no matter what you do Monday through Saturday, on Sunday, if you're in the 504 area code, 985 area code, you are a Saints fan. You love the Saints. That's your team. That's who you root for, even with a bag on your head. And so it felt good um, to have that symbolism that we were back. Negative are those damn bus tours. Sorry, guys. The bus tours were terrible. The profiting off of people's pain and loss is probably a thing that I hated the most after Katrina is seeing those buses ride through neighborhoods, stop, people taking pictures. That to me was not the most classy move, but it was definitely it's part of the thing, right? There's disaster tourism is a thing, and somebody found an industry. Doesn't make it right, but I would say that's probably the thing that came out of it that I just suck my teeth at the most. Every time I see one of those restaurants, is this still a thing? I can't believe this is still a thing. But Mardi Gras, love it even more. 2 thumbs down for the disaster tour buses.
Yeah, I'm in the same way where not at that time, but for the longest time, I just kind of like I enjoyed Mardi Gras as a kid. Obviously, just getting all the beads and everything, just sitting up on the
Yeah,
little
on the
high
ladders.
chair thing. Um, But later on, maybe in like high school, I was just like, it's whatever. It's not all that. And then I ended up getting the chance to ride in one of the parades, and that completely changed my outlook on everything. Like
Yeah.
just seeing everybody there, everybody, like you said, coming together, and just going back to your point of it's the people that make it a family, just a very giant family in the city, and that's just
Yeah.
like one of my favorite things about it as well.
Yeah. You will never be anywhere in the world and have a stranger open their home to you to let you use the restroom, tell you to get some red beans on your way back, ask you if you want something to eat, send you off with a plate. You're never going to ever in anywhere. I challenge the Americans to send me where this happens because I have not ever heard of it before. But that's what happens in New Orleans during Mardi Gras, and um, it's because of the people.
And is there anything that I didn't ask you today that you wanted to touch a little bit more on?
No, I think you did an excellent job today asking me questions, guiding me through these memories that I haven't thought about in a really long time because it's difficult, but this was fun. It was fun to go back there for a couple minutes for the people.
All right, well, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Anthony, for inviting me.
And if you haven't yet, be sure to check out KTAL News Now, which streams every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. You can find all of our previous episodes on our YouTube at KTAL News. But like I said, you can go to ktalnews.com to get all of your trending, breaking, and local stories like this one. I'll see you guys next week on another edition of KTAL News Now, which, like I said, streams every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. I'm Anthony Mocklin. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend, and thank you for joining us.